Have you ever been driving in your car, listening to your favorite song on the radio, and thought to yourself, I wonder how radio survived the rise of television? No? Just me? Well, hang tight, because the story of how radio solidified its place in the hearts and cars of Americans is pretty interesting. However, before we can delve into how exactly radio survived the onslaught of TV, we must first learn about its history. Like, what was early radio programming, and who was listening? Radio wasn't always just something that blasted through your alarm clock to wake you up in the morning. During the turn of the century, at-home radio sets could be found in most US homes. However, because they were so big and bulky, they were immobile and often kept in one room of the house. Families would gather around the radio sets at various times during the day to hear their favorite programs. In order to fill airtime, many of these early radio programs consisted of live musical performances because of the poor sound quality of phonographs of the time. As the popularity of radio began to rise, varying types of programs were added to the lineup. Scripted dramas called soap operas because of their adverts for soap, comedy show duos like Amos and Andy, tales of adventure like The Lone Ranger, and quiz shows that tested audience knowledge became a mainstay of early radio programming. Nonetheless, the 1950s spelled disaster for this popular entertainment medium. Let's just say it was a bad day for radio. In 1946, only about 8,000 households had a TV set, but by 1951, more than 10 million households owned one, quickly making TV the number one form of in-home entertainment. Naturally, many of the successful programs were taken directly from radio and placed instead onto this new medium. This scared many radio producers as the loss of these programs meant a loss of viewership and, more importantly, ad revenue. They had to think of something in order to attract a new audience. After much research, radio was pushed back into its musical roots. This audio-only medium was a perfect fit for music as innovations in technology boosted overall sound quality. The invention of the transistor made it possible for radios to become more mobile and a lot smaller than their early stationary counterparts as the first pocket-sized radio came into existence. The ability for audiences to hear some of their favorite songs and programs outside the home brought listeners back to radio. Transistors even made it possible for the radio to be in cars as car manufacturers added built-in radios to newer models. However, this newfound programming and mobility wasn't enough to restore the popularity radio once held. Radio stations began to rely on music formatting, which gave each local station a certain identity to the type of music they would play. These stations often tracked record sales to dictate what was popular in their genre and add songs to the repertoire, thus bringing in listeners. During this time, many stations introduced DJs who would play the music audiences wanted to hear, beginning a rapport with listeners, attracting them back day after day. It was a DJ by the name of Alan Freed that changed the future of radio forever. By introducing a new musical sound called rock and roll, Freed was able to attract young listeners to tune into radio shows, as many anti-rockers had placed bans on record stores selling these vinyls and had even hosted record-burning bonfires. This new sound and the fights that broke out because of it caused major publicity that sparked a new interest for radio by the public. In order to keep the young crowd listening, Todd Stortz and Bill Stewart created the Top 40 format, as they listened to see what was popular on other stations and figured out that only about 40 different songs were hits at any given time. This new countdown format kept younger viewership interested as they would tune in to see what's new each week. However, these top 40 lists were highly based on region, often differing from coast to coast. Until 1970, when Casey Kasem introduced his American Top 40 program that utilized Billboard magazine's list of top 40 hits nationwide. His show is broadcast through 500 stations across the country, creating a united experience for millions of listeners from coast to coast. This format is still in use today, with Kasem's show now being hosted by Ryan Seacrest. TV itself even helped boost the popularity of radio, as programs like American Bandstand and Soul Train introduced teens to new dance moves and, most importantly, music that can only be heard on the radio. Today, radio is prevalent in the lives of many Americans, holding a spot as a companion form of entertainment that we listen to while driving, what we set as our alarms, what we might listen to as we study, and even what might be playing in the background while we do many other activities. Today, through a multitude of apps like iHeartRadio and other online streaming services like Pandora, the wonders of radio can now be accessed through most smartphones. So now, when you're driving and the question of how radio survived the rise of television pops into your head, you'll know the answer.